Sorry, I wanted to tell you about a new book by the editors of Spacing Magazine and Reid called the Toronto Public Etiquette Guide. It has all kinds of tips about the rules of being polite in Toronto. Number 1, the essential verbal lubricants of Toronto public life are sorry and excuse me. And learning to navigate life in public in Toronto means learning to understand those two words when they're said in a bunch of different tones of voices. For example, excuse me, but excuse me, I have a question. Excuse me, which might mean I'm sorry, or excuse me, which might mean you should be sorry. Number 2, can I ask you a question? If you ask that question of strangers on the street in Toronto, they'll probably just keep walking. Panhandlers and street salespeople have begun their pitches by saying, "Can I ask you a question?" And Torontonians have learned that if somebody asks you that, what they want to do is give you a long-winded spiel that ends with them asking for money. So if you need directions or the time, just cut right to your question without asking if you can ask it first. Number 3, walk on the right, pass on the left. When you're on the sidewalk, this is the most basic rule, and it's intuitive because we drive on the right. On escalators, we stand on the right and walk on the left. But what the book points out that many people might not know is that from 1944 onwards, for a couple decades, there was a widely mocked and seldom enforced law on the books that required pedestrians to walk on the right, otherwise they would get a fine. Apparently, we take pedestrian etiquette seriously in this city, or at least we used to. Number 4, every TTC seat should be considered a courtesy seat. If you're on a really crowded subway and a seat opens up, by all means you should offer it to those around you. But if nobody else is going to take it, you should sit down. Because if you stand next to an empty seat on a crowded subway, you're just making the aisle more crowded than it would otherwise be. Sometimes that means somebody can't even get on the subway car that you're on. Sit down. Number 5, cyclists, stay off the sidewalk. The editors of Spacing Magazine have gone further. Cyclists, inevitably, when you're breaking this rule and you're riding on the sidewalk, the key thing you need to realize is that pedestrians have the right of way. You should never be driving up on them and ringing your bell to tell them to get out of your way. You should be getting off your bike and walking it until you're past them. Those are 5 rules from Spacing's book, the Toronto Public Etiquette Guide. But I'm interested in knowing, what are your biggest urban etiquette pet peeves? Email me your best suggestions at ekeenan@thestar.ca or share them on social media with the hashtag TorontoNice, and I'll collect the best ones in a future column.